In a quiet little suburb on the edge of town, life moved at its own gentle pace. The streets were lined with neat houses, each one with its perfectly trimmed lawns and flower beds bursting with color. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors by name, where kids rode bikes down the sidewalks, and where everyone seemed to share an unspoken bond. This sense of community was something the residents cherished, but it also came with its fair share of rules, and those rules were enforced by none other than the homeowners. Association opening parenthesis HOA closing parenthesis. The HOA in this neighborhood wasn't just any ordinary group of rule makers. Oh no, they prided themselves on being meticulous, almost fanatical about keeping everything in order. From making sure fences were painted the approved shade of white to sending strongly worded letters if someone left their trash cans out. For too long, the HOA had a reputation for micromanaging every detail. Some folks found it annoying, while others appreciated the effort to maintain the area's charm. But either way, nobody could deny that the HOA ran things with an iron fist. One person who often found herself rolling her eyes at the HOS antics was Karen Thompson. She lived in a cozy two-story house right smack in the middle of the block. Her husband worked long hours as a mechanic, and their teenage son spent most of his time glued to his phone or playing basketball with friends. Life was simple, predictable. Even until one day when the HOA decided to meddle in a way that would turn everyone's lives upside down. It all started with a small announcement posted on the community bulletin board. The HOA declared that they'd be fixing a cracked sidewalk near Karen's property. At first glance, it didn't seem like a big deal. Sidewalks crack all the time. It's part of living in a place where seasons change and roots grow beneath the surface. But what caught Karen's attention was the urgency in the HOA's tone. They weren't just saying, "Hey, we're going to patch this up." No, they made it sound like repairing the sidewalk was a matter of life and death. They act like the world is ending over a pothole, Karen muttered under her breath as she read the notice. Still, she shrugged it off. After all, how much trouble could fixing a sidewalk really cause? Little did she know, this seemingly harmless project was about to spiral into a nightmare none of them saw coming. The HOA assured everyone that the repairs would be quick and efficient. They hired a local construction crew, complete with jackhammers, wheelbarrows, and piles of concrete. On paper, everything looked fine. The plan showed exactly where to dig, which sections needed reinforcement, and how deep the workers should go. What the plans didn't show, however, was something crucial: a water main pipe running directly underneath the sidewalk. And not just any water main pipe, mind you, but one that supplied water to the entire block. No one thought to double-check the blueprints. Why would they? These documents had been used countless times before without issue. So, armed with confidence and outdated maps, the construction crew arrived early one Monday morning ready to get to work. As Karen sipped her coffee inside her kitchen, oblivious to what was unfolding outside, the sound of machinery filled the air. Jackhammers roared, metal clanged against pavement, and dust clouds billowed into the sky. To anyone passing by, it looked like your typical construction scene: loud, messy, but ultimately harmless. But then, disaster struck. One of the workers, following the instructions laid out for him, began pouring fresh concrete into what he believed was a drainage trench. He didn't realize, or perhaps no one told him, that the trench led straight to the hidden water main pipe. Before anyone could stop it, the wet cement flowed into the pipe, filling it completely. Within minutes, the flow of water stopped, dead in its tracks. At first, no one noticed. The crew kept working, thinking they were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when Karen got home from running errands, that the chaos began to unfold. She pulled into her driveway, only to see a crowd of neighbors gathered near the construction site. People were yelling, pointing fingers, and looking utterly bewildered. Curious, Karen hopped out of her car and approached the commotion. "What's going on?" she asked, craning her neck to see past the crowd. "It's the water," shouted a neighbor, clutching an empty bucket. "It's gone." "None of our faucets are working," Karen froze. "Gone? How could water just disappear?" She hurried inside to check for herself, turning on the tap in the kitchen. Nothing came out, not a single drop. Panic bubbled inside her chest as she rushed back outside to join the growing mob of angry residents. As the reality sank in, so did the questions. Who was responsible for this mess? How could such a vital piece of infrastructure have been overlooked? And most importantly, how were they supposed to live without water? That's when the whispers started. Someone mentioned the HOA. Another blamed the construction crew. Fingers were pointed in every direction, but one thing was certain. Whatever had happened, it was bad, really bad. For Karen, standing there amidst the confusion and frustration, it marked the beginning of a battle she never signed up for, but one she wouldn't back down from. Little did she know, this was only the tip of the iceberg. The chaos that unfolded after the water supply vanished was nothing short of a disaster movie. It started with confusion, quickly escalated to panic, and then spiraled into full-blown frustration as the reality of the situation set in. For Karen and her neighbors, life without running water wasn't just inconvenient, it was downright impossible. At first, people tried to stay calm. They assumed it was a temporary glitch, maybe a busted pipe somewhere or a citywide outage. Surely, someone would show up soon to fix it. But as hours turned into an entire day with no word from the authorities, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't going to be resolved overnight. The water wasn't coming back anytime soon. Karen noticed the change in mood almost immediately. Her neighbor, a retired teacher who always greeted her with a warm smile, looked frazzled as she carried buckets of water from her emergency stash. Another family across the street had already packed their kids into the car, heading to stay with relatives until things were sorted. Even the usually cheerful mailman seemed rattled, muttering under his breath about how this kind of thing doesn't happen in nice neighborhoods. As the afternoon dragged on, more residents gathered near the construction site, demanding answers. Some brought lawn chairs, ready to camp out if they had to. Others held signs that read things like, "Where's our water?" and "Fix it now." Tempers flared as everyone waited for anyone to explain what had gone wrong. Finally, one of the construction workers emerged, looking sheepish and avoiding eye contact. He mumbled something about a miscommunication and pointed toward the HOA office. That's when the real storm began. Karen couldn't believe what she heard next. According to the worker, they'd accidentally poured concrete into a pipe while repairing the sidewalk. A water pipe. And not just any water pipe, the main line supplying water to the whole block. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. How could anyone make such a colossal mistake? Hadn't they checked the blueprints? Didn't they know what they were doing? The crowd erupted in outrage. People shouted questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of anger and disbelief. One man stepped forward, holding up a plastic jug filled with murky liquid he claimed came from his faucet before it stopped working entirely. "This is unacceptable," he yelled. "You've ruined our lives." Karen felt her blood boil. She pushed through the crowd, determined to get some answers herself. When she reached the front, she demanded to speak directly to the person in charge. After several tense minutes, a representative from the HOA arrived, a middle-aged guy wearing some slacks and a polo shirt, clearly out of his depth. His name tag read Greg, but no one cared enough to call him by it. "What happened here?" Karen asked, her voice sharp and steady despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. "How could you let this happen?" Greg shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses as if buying time to think of an excuse. "It appears there was, an error in the documentation we provided," he stammered. "The plans didn't indicate the presence of the water main beneath the sidewalk." "An error?" Karen repeated incredulously. "Are you telling me you sent these guys to dig without even knowing where the pipes are?" The murmurs around her grew louder, angrier. Someone shouted, "This is incompetence at its finest." Another chimed in, "We pay dues for this? To have amateurs messing with our utilities?" Greg raised his hands defensively, trying to calm the mob. "We're aware of the severity of the situation," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Rest assured, we're taking immediate steps to resolve the issue." But his promises fell flat. No one trusted him, not after what had happened. Karen crossed her arms, glaring at him. "Immediate steps? What does that even mean? How long will it take to fix this mess?" Greg hesitated, glancing nervously at the ground before answering. "It could be weeks, possibly longer." The response sent shockwaves through the crowd. Weeks? Longer? Without water? Parents exchanged worried looks, thinking about bathing their children, cooking meals, cleaning dishes. Elderly residents fretted over how they'd manage without access to fresh water. Everyone knew this wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a crisis. As night fell, the group disbanded reluctantly, each person retreating to their homes to figure out how to survive the coming days. Karen sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the empty sink. Mark walked in, carrying a stack of bottled water they'd hastily bought from the store. "Here," he said, placing them on the counter. "It's not much, but it'll tide us over for now." She nodded, grateful for his effort, but her mind raced with questions. What would they do tomorrow? Or the day after that? This wasn't sustainable. Something had to give. Ethan wandered in a few moments later, holding his phone. "Mom, I saw online that other neighborhoods are donating water tanks. Maybe we can ask for help?" Karen perked up slightly at the suggestion. "That's actually not a bad idea," she admitted. If nothing else, they needed to rally together and find solutions. Sitting around waiting for the HOA to magically fix everything wasn't going to cut it. The next morning, Karen woke up early, feeling restless. She grabbed a notebook and pen, jotting down ideas for action. First, they needed supplies, lots of them. Bottled water, portable tanks, anything to keep everyone hydrated and functional. Second, they needed answers and accountability. Someone had to pay for this monumental screw dash up. By mid-morning, she'd rallied a small group of neighbors willing to help. Together, they drafted flyers asking for donations and posted them around town. Word spread quickly, and within hours, cars began pulling up to drop off cases of water and jugs. A local church offered to host a temporary distribution center, and volunteers worked tirelessly to organize the influx of supplies. Despite the progress, Karen couldn't shake the anger simmering inside her. Sure, they were managing for now, but none of this should have happened in the first place. The HOA had dropped the ball in the worst possible way, and someone needed to hold them responsible. As she watched families line up to collect water, she realized this wasn't just about fixing a broken pipe anymore. It was about justice. That evening, Karen called a meeting in her backyard, inviting anyone who wanted to join. Dozens of neighbors showed up, spilling onto the driveway and sidewalk. Faces lit by lanterns, they shared stories of hardship and frustration, vowing to stand united against the HOA's negligence. "We can't let them get away with this," Karen said, standing on a step stool so everyone could see her. "They messed up our lives, and they need to make it right. Not just with words, but with action." Her speech earned applause, whistles, and cheers. For the first time since the disaster began, people felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't powerless, they were a community, and together they could fight. As the meeting wrapped up, Karen felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over. Far from it. The days that followed the backyard meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Karen quickly emerged as the unofficial leader of the neighborhood's resistance against the HOA, though she hadn't planned it that way. It just sort of happened like gravity pulling her toward the center of the chaos. People looked to her for guidance because she spoke with clarity and conviction. Two things in short supply during those uncertain times. Karen wasted no time. The very next morning, she started drafting petitions, gathering signatures from every household on the block. These weren't your average "we're unhappy" petitions either. They were detailed, well-organized documents outlining exactly what had gone wrong and what needed to be done to fix it. She included copies of the outdated blueprints, photos of the construction site, and even quotes from neighbors describing how the water outage had disrupted their lives. By the end of the week, the stack of signed papers was thick enough to rival a phone book, but Karen knew petitions alone wouldn't be enough. They needed leverage, something that would force the HOA to take them seriously. That's when someone suggested hiring a lawyer. At first, the idea seemed daunting. Legal fees were expensive, and not everyone could afford to chip in. But then another neighbor stepped forward, offering to cover part of the cost. Word spread, and soon donations poured in from retirees living on fixed incomes to young couples, scraping together whatever they could spare. It was proof that when push came to shove, people would come together for the greater good. The lawyer they hired, a sharp-tongued woman known for taking on big corporations, didn't mince words during their initial consultation. "This isn't just negligence," she said, flipping through the evidence Karen had gathered. "This is gross incompetence. And trust me, we're going to hold them accountable." With legal action on the horizon, Karen turned her attention back to keeping morale high among the residents. Living without running water was hard enough, but doing so while feeling powerless made everything worse. So she organized daily check-ins, a chance for people to vent, share ideas, or simply remind themselves they weren't alone in this fight. Sometimes these meetings took place in driveways, other times in backyards. Once, they even held one at the local park, where kids played soccer while parents strategized under the shade of trees. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, Karen sat on her porch with Mark. Ethan was inside, video chatting with friends about the absurdity of their situation. "Can you believe this is our life now?" Karen asked, shaking her head. "I never thought I'd end up leading some kind of rebellion over a water pipe." Mark chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "You're good at it, though," he said. "People listen to you. They trust you." Karen sighed, staring out at the quiet street. Trust was nice, but it didn't make the burden any lighter. Every decision felt like it carried the weight of the entire community on her shoulders. What if she made the wrong call? What if all this effort led nowhere? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. It was an older woman from down the block, carrying a plate of cookies wrapped in foil. "I baked these for you," she said, handing them over with a shy smile. "Just wanted to say thank you for everything you're doing." Karen accepted the gift, touched by the gesture. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "We're all in this together." The woman nodded before heading back home, leaving Karen with a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe she couldn't fix everything overnight, but she could keep showing up for her family, for her neighbors, for herself. Meanwhile, tensions with the HOA continued to escalate. Greg, the same guy who tried to downplay the disaster at the construction site, became public enemy number one. He avoided eye contact whenever he passed through the neighborhood, ducking into his car like he was dodging paparazzi. Rumors swirled about his imminent resignation, though no official announcement had been made yet. Then came the media. Somehow, word of the fiasco leaked to local news outlets, and reporters descended upon the suburb like vultures circling prey. Camera crews set up tripods on front lawns, microphones were shoved into faces, and headlines screamed things like, "HOA horror, neighborhood left high and dry," and concrete chaos sparks community uprising. At first, Karen dreaded the attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the thought of bearing her grievances to strangers made her uneasy. But after giving a few interviews, she realized the coverage worked in their favor. The more people heard about their plight, the harder it became for the HOA to sweep it under the rug. Even national networks picked up the story, turning it into a cautionary tale about bureaucratic mismanagement. Not everyone appreciated the publicity, though. Some neighbors grumbled about being portrayed as victims, while others worried about property values plummeting due to the negative press. Karen listened to their concerns but stood firm. "If we stay silent, nothing changes," she told them. Sometimes, making noise is the only way to get heard. As the weeks dragged on, tempers flared, alliances shifted, and patience wore thin. There were moments when Karen questioned whether they'd ever see justice or clean water again. But then she'd look around at the makeshift water stations, the handwritten signs of solidarity taped to windows, and the volunteers tirelessly distributing supplies, and she'd remember why they were fighting. One particularly tense evening, a group of disgruntled residents gathered outside the HOA office, chanting slogans and holding banners. Someone suggested storming the building, but Karen intervened before things got out of hand. "We're better than that," she said firmly. "Violence won't solve anything. Let's stick to the plan." Her calm demeanor diffused the situation, earning her even more respect from the crowd. It was clear by now that Karen wasn't just a spokesperson, she was the glue holding everyone together. By the time the lawsuit was officially filed, the neighborhood buzzed with cautious optimism. The legal team outlined their demands: compensation for damages, reimbursement for expenses incurred during the water outage, and a commitment from the HOA to upgrade the aging infrastructure. Most importantly, they wanted accountability, public acknowledgement of the HOA's role in the debacle. Greg finally resigned shortly after the lawsuit hit the news, citing personal reasons. His departure brought mixed reactions. Some celebrated it as a small victory, while others saw it as too little, too late. Either way, the wheels of justice were turning, and there was no stopping them now. As Karen tucked Ethan into bed that night, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Their quiet suburban life had been turned upside down, forcing them to confront challenges they'd never imagined. Yet, amidst the frustration and uncertainty, she'd discovered something unexpected: strength. Not just her own, but the collective strength of a community united by adversity. "You okay, Mom?" Ethan asked sleepily, interrupting her thoughts. Smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yeah, kiddo, we're gonna be fine." And for the first time in weeks, she actually believed it. As the lawsuit against the HOA dragged on, life in the neighborhood began to feel like a strange mix of normalcy and chaos. The water outage was still a daily struggle, but people had adapted in creative and sometimes humorous ways. Some families set up elaborate systems using buckets and siphons to share water from portable tanks. Others turned their garages into makeshift laundromats, pooling resources to wash clothes in bulk. Kids even started a trend of carrying squirt guns filled with drinking water, turning the crisis into a game of sorts. Karen found herself at the center of it all, juggling her role as a mom, wife, and reluctant activist. Every morning felt like stepping onto a battlefield. Her phone buzzed nonstop with calls and texts from neighbors asking for updates, reporters seeking quotes, and lawyers needing more paperwork. Despite the exhaustion, she couldn't help but marvel at how resilient everyone had become. What started as anger and frustration had transformed into something stronger. Unity. The legal process itself was a roller coaster. At first, the HOA tried to play defense, issuing vague apologies and blaming unforeseen circumstances. But when the media coverage intensified and public opinion turned sharply against them, they shifted tactics. They hired their own high-powered attorneys who argued that the outdated blueprints were the city's fault, not theirs. It was classic finger-pointing, and Karen saw right through it. They're trying to dodge responsibility, she told Mark one night over dinner. But we've got them cornered. There's no way they can deny this mess as they're doing. Mark nodded, though he looked worried. Just be careful, okay? You're putting yourself out there a lot. Not everyone's going to appreciate it. He wasn't wrong. While most residents supported Karen's efforts, a small group of dissenters emerged. These were typically older homeowners who feared rocking the boat might hurt property values or bring unwanted attention to the neighborhood. One evening, after a particularly heated meeting, an elderly man pulled Karen aside and whispered, "You're stirring up trouble, young lady. Sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie." Karen bit back a sharp retort. Instead, she smiled politely and said, "With all due respect, sir, those sleeping dogs ruined our lives. Ignoring the problem won't make it go away." Her response earned nods of approval from others nearby, but the encounter left her unsettled. She knew criticism came with the territory, but hearing it directly still stung. Still, she refused to let it deter her. If anything, it fueled her determination to see this fight through to the end. Meanwhile, the media circus continued to grow. Reporters camped out near the construction site, interviewing anyone willing to talk. National news outlets sent crews to film segments about the concrete catastrophe, as one anchor dubbed it. The story resonated with viewers across the country, sparking conversations about accountability and transparency in local governance. People shared memes mocking the HOA, while late-night comedians cracked jokes about turning water pipes into sidewalks. For Karen, the attention was bittersweet. On one hand, it kept the pressure on the HOA and ensured the issue stayed in the spotlight. On the other hand, it made her feel like a character in someone else's drama. Strangers recognized her at the grocery store, calling her the water warrior or asking for selfies. Friends joked that she should start a podcast or write a book about her experience. She laughed it off, but deep down, she wondered if any of this would have happened without the cameras rolling. Amidst the chaos, there were moments of levity that reminded everyone what truly mattered. Like the time a local restaurant owner offered free meals to affected families, saying, "We're all neighbors here." Or the impromptu block party organized by a group of teenagers, complete with music, snacks, and a dunk tank rigged with recycled rainwater. Even Ethan got involved, designing flyers for a charity basketball game to raise funds for legal fees. Watching him hustle tickets door to door gave Karen a sense of pride she hadn't felt in months. But not every moment was lighthearted. As winter approached, concerns about frozen pipes and heating systems added another layer of stress. Without running water, many households struggled to prepare for colder temperatures. A single mother living 2 doors down broke down in tears during a meeting, confessing she didn't know how to keep her toddler warm without access to hot water. Karen hugged her tightly, promising to find a solution. That weekend, volunteers rallied to deliver space heaters, blankets, and insulated containers to vulnerable families. Local charities pitched in too, donating supplies and organizing workshops on winter preparedness. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness could shine through. Back at home, Karen wrestled with guilt over neglecting her own family. Between meetings, interviews, and strategizing sessions, she barely had time to cook dinner or check on Ethan's schoolwork. Mark did his best to pick up the slack, but tension simmered beneath the surface. One evening, after a long day of arguing with lawyers, Karen snapped at Mark for leaving dirty dishes in the sink. He shot back, "Maybe I'd clean up more if you were around to help." The argument ended with both of them apologizing, but the underlying tension lingered. Later that night, lying awake in bed, Karen replayed the fight in her mind. Was she sacrificing too much for the cause? Was it fair to expect her family to shoulder the burden of her activism? The next morning, she decided to take a step back, not from the fight, but from letting it consume her entirely. She called a neighbor she trusted and asked her to co-lead the upcoming meeting, giving herself permission to spend the afternoon baking cookies with Ethan instead. As they laughed over flour-covered countertops, she realized how much she'd missed these simple joys. By the time December rolled around, the lawsuit entered its final stages. Settlement talks began behind closed doors, with both sides hashing out terms. Rumors swirled about potential payouts and infrastructure upgrades, but nothing official had been announced yet. Neighbors grew restless, eager for closure after months of uncertainty. Then, one chilly Tuesday morning, the verdict arrived. The HOA agreed to pay substantial reparations to affected families, covering everything from lost wages to medical expenses incurred during the water outage. Additionally, they committed to funding major improvements to the neighborhood's aging infrastructure, including replacing all underground pipes and installing backup systems to prevent future disasters. When Karen heard the news, she cried, not because she was sad, but because relief hit her like a tidal wave. All those sleepless nights, stressful meetings, and sacrifices had finally paid off. She called Mark at work to share the good news, and he let out a whoop loud enough for his coworkers to hear. That evening, the neighborhood erupted in celebration. Someone strung Christmas lights across the street, while another resident fired up a barbecue grill. Kids ran wild, spraying each other with their now iconic squirt guns, while adults toasted with cans of soda. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the air without a trace of bitterness. As Karen stood on her porch, watching the festivities unfold, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the victory, but for the community that had risen from the ashes of disaster. They'd faced unimaginable challenges together, and in doing so, they'd grown stronger than ever. This is what it means to be a neighbor, she thought, smiling to herself. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that brighter days lay ahead. The settlement may have marked the official end of the legal battle, but for Karen and her neighbors, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. The HOA's agreement to compensate families and upgrade the neighborhood's infrastructure brought a wave of relief, but it also sparked conversations about how to move forward. After all, this wasn't just about fixing pipes. It was about rebuilding trust and redefining what it meant to live as a community. In the weeks following the settlement, life slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as possible. Water flowed freely again, faucets gurgled happily, and washing machines hummed with renewed purpose. Yet, the scars of the ordeal lingered. Some relationships remained strained, particularly between former HOA members and their critics. A few neighbors who had sided with the HOA early on still avoided eye contact at mailboxes or muttered under their breath during block meetings. But for the most part, people were ready to let bygones be bygones. Karen found herself reflecting on everything she'd learned during those chaotic months. Leading a grassroots movement had taught her more than she ever imagined, not just about standing up for herself, but about listening to others, finding common ground, and staying resilient in the face of adversity. She realized that while the fight against the HOA had been exhausting, it had also brought out the best in many people. Neighbors who once barely acknowledged each other now shared meals, exchanged gardening tips, and even babysat one another's kids. It was as if surviving the disaster together had stripped away pretenses, leaving only raw, authentic connections behind. One evening, after a particularly lively neighborhood meeting, Karen sat on her porch watching Ethan shoot hoops in the driveway. He'd grown taller over the past few months, his lanky frame hinting at the young man he was becoming. As she sipped a cup of tea, Mark joined her, handing her a plate of cookies fresh from the oven. "You did good," he said simply, nudging her shoulder. "I'm proud of you." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "We did good," she corrected him. "None of this would have happened without everyone pitching in," Mark chuckled. "True, still you were the glue holding us together. Don't sell yourself short." His words stayed with her long after the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. For so long, Karen had seen herself as an ordinary person, a mom juggling groceries, bills, and teenage drama. But this experience had shown her that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth celebrating. As spring approached, the neighborhood came alive with signs of renewal. Flower beds bloomed with vibrant colors, trees sprouted fresh leaves, and construction crews worked tirelessly to replace aging pipes and install state-of-the-art water systems. The HOA, eager to rebuild its tarnished reputation, went above and beyond the settlement terms, hosting workshops on emergency preparedness and launching a transparency initiative to keep residents informed about future projects. Greg, the former HOA president, faded into obscurity, replaced by a younger, more approachable leader who seemed genuinely committed to change. Karen didn't stop advocating, though. If anything, her role evolved. Instead of fighting fires, she focused on prevention, organizing regular check-ins with local officials, reviewing blueprints before any new construction began, and encouraging neighbors to voice concerns early rather than waiting for problems to escalate. She became a bridge between the community and the HOA, ensuring that mistakes like the concrete-filled pipe never happened again. Ethan, too, grew into his own kind of activism. Inspired by his mom's leadership, he started a school club focused on environmental issues, rallying classmates to tackle challenges like recycling and energy conservation. When Karen attended one of their meetings, she couldn't help but beam with pride as she watched him confidently lead discussions and brainstorm solutions. "Looks like I'm not the only activist in the family anymore," she teased him afterward. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Karen herself. Before the water crisis, she'd often felt invisible, like just another cog in the suburban machine. Now she carried herself with a quiet confidence, knowing she'd made a difference, not just for her family, but for an entire neighborhood. Her phone still buzzed regularly, but instead of frantic calls about broken pipes, it was invitations to speak at town hall meetings or join advisory boards. She declined some opportunities, prioritizing time with her loved ones, but accepted others, eager to share lessons learned and inspire others to take action. On a warm Saturday afternoon, months after the dust had settled, the neighborhood gathered for a special event, a dedication ceremony for the newly upgraded water system. Local officials gave speeches, thanking residents for their patience and resilience. Children released balloons into the sky, symbolizing hope and renewal. And Karen, standing alongside Mark and Ethan, unveiled a plaque commemorating the ordeal. It read, "Through adversity, we found strength. Together, we built a stronger community." Asterisk as applause rippled through the crowd, Karen felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't just a victory lap. It was a reminder of how far they'd come. They'd faced a nightmare and emerged stronger, united not by anger or blame, but by a shared commitment to making things better. Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the night sky, Karen stood on her porch with Mark and Ethan. The laughter of children echoed down the street, mingling with the scent of barbecues and freshly cut grass. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything felt right. "You know," Karen said softly, leaning against Mark's shoulder, "I wouldn't wish that whole mess on anyone. But I wouldn't trade it either." "Why's that?" Mark asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because it showed us what we're capable of," she replied. "And it reminded me that sometimes, even in the toughest moments, we find our best selves." Mark squeezed her hand, and Ethan grinned, tossing a basketball toward the hoop. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be, but for now, it was enough. As the stars twinkled overhead, Karen knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Because that's what communities do. That's what families do. And that's what makes life worth living.